Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second podcast. Uh, the Become Your Own Therapist podcast is a podcast to help people who don't have access to therapy, who might be a bit reluctant to go, or just don't have accessibility in any way. I think you'll be very interested in today's episode because I have Stephen C. Hayes with me. Stephen C. Hayes is a foundation professor of psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and is the author of 46 books, including Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, which for a time was one of the best selling self help books in the United States. And his new book, A Liberated Mind, is authored by him as well. He's an expert on the importance of acceptance, mindfulness, and values, and he's ranked among the most cited psychologists in the world. So I'm extremely excited to be discussing this with someone who's just so prolific in our field. And I hope that you all get value from this discussion. So, Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Looking forward to it, Nevern.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with a very unfair question, which is to explain your life's work in 5 minutes, just to give to the layperson who doesn't know much about psychology. What kind of therapy do you do?
Well, really, I'm interested in what are the core processes that move our lives forward or backward, and to distill that down into the smallest set of things that still do the job. And over a 40-year arc, we've focused on 6 basic processes that we call psychological flexibility. There are others to add, but those are the smallest set that do the most things in the most area known in psychological science, in my opinion. Because now, 40 years later, there's 850 randomized trials, 6,000 studies on what happens when you do the opposite of these 6 things, or you do these things. So 6 is not too hard to remember, but you can distill it down to 3, and you can distill it down to 1. So the 3 version is to learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in life. And each of those has 2 features to that. The 1 version is to learn to be more psychologically flexible. And acceptance and commitment therapy, or outside of a therapy context in work environments or things like that, acceptance and commitment training. But in either case, it's called ACT, not ACT, by the way. So if you heard someone talking about ACT, they probably haven't listened very, very much to ACT therapists. But it isn't just those. It turns out those processes are moved by many of our wisdom traditions, by our deeper clinical traditions, by life itself. It's a lot of what novelists are writing about, and dancers are dancing about, and filmmakers are making films about. I mean, really, when you see what's inside these processes, there's a little bit of a, well, of course, kind of a moment, but the mind is tricky, and the reason why it's hard to learn these things isn't that they're unfamiliar, or even that you don't know it. You already know it, but the organ between your ears doesn't know it. And the source of that is that what's guiding us, this analytical, judgmental mind part of us, is very recent. Maybe 250,000 years, or maybe 2.8 million years, something in that range. Depends on whether or not the hominins were doing it, or was this a Homo sapiens invention. But we know that the language trained chimps don't do what your 12-month-old baby does, that puts us on a journey to having this clash between symbolic thought, what you and I are doing right now, and the rest of us. And so you kind of know, but your mind doesn't know, not your analytic judgmental mind. So a lot of what that means is learning these skills is not hard, it's tricky, which is hard. But it's not hard effortful, it's hard tricky, because you'll go through round after round of it, and no matter how many times you do it, your mind will still trick you into, oh, I got the answer. No, it doesn't. It's following along behind, telling a story. And so when we dive into the skills, I think I can actually convince people, I think, pretty quickly that they know more than they think they know, which might be a good place to start.
Go for it.
Well, if you were to put yourself in a physical position when you're a kid, did you ever play statues where you suddenly stop,
Yeah.
and if you were to put your body in a position that would be like what a sculpture would do to show what's going on inside a person, you just think of an issue that's really hard for you psychologically, challenging to you. If you were in your mind's eye, or you could even do it if nobody's watching, put your body in the shape of you at your worst when dealing with that issue, take a mental snapshot, and then with the same issue, don't change the issue, you're your best when dealing with that issue. If you just do that, I've got it right over here. Probably you at your worst will look something like that.
Yeah.
Almost certainly, your head will come down, your eyes will close, your hands will cover you, your arms and hands will come in, you might bend at the waist. Some people run when you ask them to do that, they just literally run. Conversely, you're your best, your head will come up, your eyes will open, your arms and hands will go out, right? All right, well, what are you expressing with your body? You're saying being more open, more aware, and more able to do things, more actively engaged. That's what I just said is psychological flexibility. In other words, Another way I could convince you, just pick somebody who's a hero of yours, somebody who really is a guide, somebody who's uplifted you in your life, somebody who, when you're in trouble, when you're really struggling, you think of, that person, has some wisdom. You're going to find the same skills when they're with you. They're really with you. They're not looking at their watch. They're not criticizing you constantly. They're not telling you did this wrong or that wrong. They're probably pretty accepting of you as a person. What you really care about matters to them. They don't ride over your deepest values without a second thought. You can be together in ways that fit the opportunities of the situation, open, aware, and actively engaged when we unpack it. So in our heroes, in our guides, in the people who lift us up, and even in the wisdom of our own body, we know. But this organ doesn't know. Because this organ, although it has the ability to step back and say, wow, and appreciate, like when you see a sunset, and know enough just to shut that up. And our normal motor mind, I don't like that. I want that. This is better than that. Well, what if I do that? Oh, no, I used to. Oh, that's not fair. Why is it? Problem solving. Problem solving, great. Except when it's turned on you and your life becomes a problem to be solved, not a process to be experienced and a life to be lived. So that's the long and short of it, is how do you learn to put your mind on a leash, show up in your moments, focus on what's important to you by choice, and get your feet moving in that direction. Simple, but really hard. You'll be dragging this little screaming Mimi along for the journey, and it's going to constantly trick you into taking the wrong turns.
Man, there's so much value in that. So many doors I feel like we could go through here. I guess what's coming to mind right now is if for the people listening, what are some of the processes you spoke about? Lots of different processes that move us forward or backwards. What have you in your 40 years of experience and also research and academics, what are some of the processes that are quite easy actually to implement, but are non-intuitive for that thinking, justifying rational mind?
Well, the easy one threw me off what you're saying because of the trickiness of it. The single easiest one to just touch, I think, is probably values. I mean, what do you really care about? If you think about Well, think about this. Think about your heroes,
Mm,
and pick somebody who's dead and gone,
mm,
so that there's no possibility that they can do something for you, or no, this is what they meant to you that's been
mm,
left behind. And just think about what comes to mind. Like, why is that person your hero?
mm,
I bet you it's not how expensive their car was, how big their house was. It probably has absolutely nothing to do with the things that we're normally struggling with. How good their health was, their physical
mm,
health. No, it probably has something to do with what they stood for.
mm,
What all right?
mm.
Well,
Yeah.
let me just ask you this. If they're your hero, doesn't that mean you want to stand for that? You want to be about that? You want to reflect that in your life moments?
Mm,
Okay, so what could you do today that would do that?
mm,
What could you do in the next hour or two that would do that? What could you do in the next 5 minutes that would do that?
mm,
You have any power in your own life, any ability to respond in your own life,
mm,
and the way we say it in English now, any responsibility in your own life to move your life in a direction that reflects what you most deeply yearn to be about.
mm.
Now, sometimes people get shamed by that. They go, oh, what's it? Okay, wait a minute. Is that the way your guide was? No. You didn't pick somebody who said, oh, I'm so ashamed of myself. I guarantee you did not pick that guide.
Mm, mm,
Well, so I come right back. So you see what your mind does
mm,
immediately, even with a guide,
mm,
you'd be drawn to it. And immediately this organ says, yeah, that's right. And look how bad I am. I'm no good. I'm not like that. Comparison.
mm,
Why? That's problem solving. Judgment. Why? That's problem solving.
mm,
Yeah, but it's also, life
mm,
draining when it goes or it doesn't
mm,
work to take it.
mm,
But once you have that, I mean, we've done this work in our recent, those thousands of studies. We've done it where we said, okay, we're just going to do values, and you can just do that work and draws people forward, and it kind of lifts them up. But then sooner or later, people hit things that are really hard,
mm,
like past abuse or deep betrayals or really painful losses that haven't been faced before. Then what are you going to do? And
mm,
really, the values guide will help you through it if you can learn to step back and keep oriented, but it's hard. So
mm,
then we work on these skills of emotional opening, and
mm,
especially the skill that you just saw in that values thing turning into shame, of when your mind does
mm,
its judgment thing, catching it in flight so that you can notice it. And in that tiny little gap of noticing your mind rather than just living in the world structured by your mind. I'm not thinking anything. This just sucks. No, it sucks is a judgment. Your,
mm,
your analytic judgmental mind did that.
mm, mm,
Catching that is hard. I mean, if you look around the room, I bet you just pick anything other than you human. Don't do it to you human. Pick anything. You can probably find something to say that this sucks
mm,
about. You could probably say, what's wrong with that? Well, that means it's always there. It's always able to go in that direction. And it's fine. I don't ever say, because that would be another layer, a loop within a loop. Oh,
mm,
you're being judgmental. What's the matter with you? Dude,
uh,
that's judgmental to say that. You
mm,
understand why it's tricky?
mm,
So what we need to do is and this is sort of a mindfulness skill of catch your mind in flight. Notice that you're minding, you're judging, you're interpreting, you're predicting, you're looking to the past and the future, you're comparing. And then with some self-kindness, thank your mind for trying to help you here. It's good that you have those skills. You need them in lots of places, like doing your taxes or fixing your car. You don't need them in terms of peace of mind. You don't need them in terms of love. You don't need them in terms of compassion. And then just step back just enough, not to get rid of them, but to have some choice in there about what your life's moment on, and can you focus on your values and get your feet moving there? So in a way, it's all one thing. And if you want the simplest, most direct way in, go through your values, but your mind will trip you up. So you better have those, we call them diffusion skills, those skills to take what your mind's giving you. It's here and you can hardly see anything else, and put it here so that you can have some choices and see other things other than just what this organ between your ears is doing. If you do that same thing with your emotions, that's helpful. If you do it with your attention, that's helpful. And then, if you, in that process, you'll notice that there's a whole human being noticing these things. And that more spiritual part of you is helpful. And then really creating habits around that. So I've actually said all 6 things just in kind of a jumbled way. I haven't given them labels, but those are the 6 flexibility skills. You already know them. You just don't put them in your life enough. You put them in your heart through your heroes. You put them in your knowledge through trial and error learning. You know better, but this part doesn't know better. So you got some work to do. And by the way, you'll never be finished. No matter how much work you do on this, no matter how big you get, there's more big to get. And right at the edge, your mind's going to trick you in the very same way. So it's a life journey, peeling the onion.
There's something deflating about that last comment, but also relieving. At the same time.
It means you're not broken. You're not going to be fixed. You're not going to be God's gift to psychological flexibility. You're not the Buddha. You're not, you're not Christ. You're not whoever your spiritual leaders are. You're not. But that doesn't mean that these leaders aren't of importance. Their importance, like a lighthouse, is important. Doesn't mean you're a lighthouse, but it means you can head towards the lighthouse. So, humble is good. I mean, humble means dirt in English, right? Humus. And it means having your feet on the ground. Don't be so grand. You're not, don't let your head get big. Fortunately, I have a wife who keeps it small. But
that's helpful.
Feet on the ground. Feet on the ground. One step at a time. Eyes on the lighthouse just to know enough to the direction, and then eyes on what's in front of you so you don't trip over that rock. And, sometimes you have to negotiate things. Sometimes you wander. Sometimes there's things in front of you that you can't just go straight through. So it's a wandering journey, but it doesn't have to be an aimless journey. Set the aim and learn. And, when that happens, we've done research on this, thousands of people followed for a decade, regular measurement of this. It's pretty well nailed down science that when you do the things I'm talking about, gradually, incrementally, life will open up and, you'll learn, you'll make mistakes, but you'll learn from them and you'll keep coming back. The things that distinguish trials usually is not what happens immediately, but what happens when you stumble and fall. You pick yourself up, you reorient, you go forward, so that over time, these trajectories seem to continue if you can put psychological flexibility into your heart and head and hands. And, when life is progressing and opening up, you can be kinder to yourself, knowing, especially as you see trial after trial, that the skills you're learning, the things you're doing, will be there for you later on. But you may stumble, you may get hooked, you may have some troubles. And I found that, I've been on this 40-year journey myself, but when I developed tinnitus from all my punk rock days, it took me 3 years to apply my own life's work to it. That's just how dumb we are. Sometimes life has to beat us up before it occurs to us to apply even the skills we've acquired. So if, especially for the purpose of your podcast, I can say without, excuse me for it'll sound like self-praise, but if you had to focus on the smallest set of things to do that are what therapy will give you at its best, and that you can learn from self-help books and from the internet for free. And if you just know where to look, psychological flexibility would be what I'd recommend. And I think a fair scientific review would land pretty close to that.
Hmm. Great. So is it a fair summary to say that it's, but what I'm hearing is you need this aim, and then the flexibility processes help you move toward that aim incrementally, even when these obstacles show up. So it's almost like you need the aim and you need the ability to constantly maneuver in that sort of shaky space.
Exactly. No,
Okay.
exactly. And I'll give you just an example of how the mind normally gets in the way. What you said is exactly right. When you encounter an obstacle, what your mind basically will usually say is you need to get around it, or you need to get rid of it, or you need to get through it, or you need to remove it. What if the obstacle is in your history? It's going to go with you. So it doesn't occur to us normally, because problem solving, usually if you have dirt on the floor, you vacuum it up. If the paint is peeling off your wall, you scrape it off and you repaint it. If you don't have a roof, you build one. If you do, it's usually like that. You add and subtract in ways that removes the issue. That's not what happens with history. A lot of your barriers are internal barriers, right? You learned them by pain, for example. Let's say, okay, barriers to intimacy. If you get into values, I bet you any value you pick has a social aspect to it. Even if it's, I want to appreciate beauty. Yeah, but you want to share it. I mean, very occasionally people will really want to do their art and have nobody see it, but it's really unusual. We want to share it. And most of our stuff, what do you value? Oh, relationships, I want to have kids, love is important to me. I mean, usually it's so freaking social, it just screams social, right? Because we're the social primates. We're the ones that evolved in small bands and troops. We're the ones who, when we were born, an hour later, mama looks in her eyes and we dump endorphins in our brain. Woohoo! I'm seen. And mama does too, and good thing. Otherwise, who would take care of these little rugrats for 2 years before, they'd be pooping on the floor? I mean, why would you do that? It's because they're so sweet, but sweet is also biological, because you need to belong, because that's the only way we survive. Yeah. Yeah, but even though we have that powerful kind of social thing, when history shows up, like barriers to intimacy, you've been betrayed. I mean, I'm looking at a person right now. I know you've been betrayed. I know you've been lied to. I know you've been rejected. I absolutely 100% certain know that. Why? Because you're an alive human being. And every single freaking person listening to this podcast has had social rejection, pain, betrayal, lies, disappointments, maybe even outright abuse. Some people listening have had parents who said, I love you, at the same time they're sexually abusing them. Think about that. Okay, what are you going to do with that? Is that like dirt on the floor? Peeling paint? No, you can remove dirt on the floor. You can vacuum it up. What are you going to remove that? How? I'll drink enough. Oh, great. That doesn't really remove it. I mean, you end up having to pray for brain injury. That is not a good thing to pray for. So we have a different, because we're historical creatures, problem solving of its normal form doesn't work. And when you hit a barrier, it's much more like you need to do something like inhaling the barrier. You need to take it on board. That doesn't seem logical, but it is psychological. So it's different. Our outside skills that are, that's what problem solving was for. I mean, you kept you from being eaten by lions and stuff like that. That's great. But it didn't evolve for our happiness. We didn't hey, I got a great idea. No, it was social cooperation initially. Can you bring me an apple? The symbolic reasoning then leading to, and furthermore, I can make my cave nicer. You know, I can solve problems. I can avoid being eaten by the tiger.
Mm.
Yeah, but what are you going to do with your history?
Mm.
Not have it, eliminate it? Bad idea.
Mm.
Learn how to carry it. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? And you're going to do it the way, much more the way you do if you see a sunset tonight and say, wow, because you know full well it isn't just positive things. If you have a crying child in front of you who's been abused or has something horrible happen, you're probably going to say, wow. You're not going to say, hey, kid, you're bumming me out.
Mm.
Well, can you do that with yourself? Can you bring this kind of wow period?
Mm.
Like, wow, when you look at the sun and the sunset and then like, but the cloud is misshapen. You don't do that. You know, you have the wisdom to know that you should just observe, describe, and appreciate. You'll say, how pink, you know, so can you do that with your same stuff, like with your history? Say, how painful, how hard, how unfair. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, one thing probably means you yearn for things that are loyal, intimate, committed, kind, fair. How would you create that in your life? How would you create relationships that are like that? Probably not by running away or pretending it never happened. So the wisdom journey is counterintuitive, meaning that the dominant organ that we feed mostly, which is problem solving, won't give you an easy, clean answer. Your spiritual training might, or you know, your guides will, but your judgmental mind won't. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Focus on that journey. When you hit barriers, learn how to deal with them, but you're going to have to learn some new things to deal with them. You're going to learn some things that are intuitive, spiritual, more like art than science, more like appreciation than a math problem.
Mm. Mm. I'm hearing that a lot of the problem comes in from people trying to treat the internal world like they do the external world, because I'm hearing that the problem solving mind
Awesome.
is it can delete and remove physical objects, but these internal phenomena like thoughts and emotions they don't quite work. They don't have the same metaphysics.
They don't work that way. They're historical and situational. Now you can remove some of it by situation and by knowing and seeing what's going on, being able to behave in the situation. For example, you know, if you take something like a person who's been abused, let's say in relationships, and now I'm into a relationship and there's a little tiny voice that, yeah, that person is so attractive. That's it. And something's not right. You know, an early warning system. Well, to do that, you better have your tendrils out. You better have your feelers out. Yeah. Be able to read the situation. So sometimes you can use external skills like avoid being in situations that are unhealthy or dangerous or bad for your growth. That's a problem solving skills. But you better have your spidey sense out. You know, you better have yours. Now, here's the problem. If you've been handling problems that are historical problems, issues, barriers that are historical, by suppressing and pushing down and hiding and cover over, what's happening to your feelers? That's what you're attacking. That's what you're attacking. So your spidey sense isn't out there. How do I know that? Well, take, for example, this is, take alexithymia. I don't have good words for the emotions I feel. I don't even know what I feel. What does that predict? It predicts problems in relationships. For example, it predicts abuse. For example, it predicts if you've been abused in the past, of being abused again in the future, for example. And what produces that? Avoiding your feelings. Experiential avoidance, we call it. That's the core of ACT, is learning not to avoid your feelings. Well, When you avoid your feelings, you feel better. Yeah, but you don't feel better. You just feel better, but not in a way that's healthy. It's not feeling better because something good happened. It's feeling better because you've suppressed something, hid something, put it in the drawer. And so that's why these things tend to evolve and build, and we end up with mental health problems. Mental health problems are grown into often by logical, reasonable, sensible, pathological things we do. We're just, as you say, we're mishandling. So the rules are different inside. And what if life is trying to teach you the rules and you already know them because you can show it with your body, but you need to sort of gently rein in the mind enough that those skills can come and you can begin to be guided by the wisdom within and without, and less by, me as a math problem.
Yeah, I've seen that happen in my own life where the avoidance of the emotion was actually worse than the actual emotion. It led to worse outcomes, and there was like this, yeah, it just became this thing in itself that's self-sustained.
It's
Um,
self-sustained. So absolutely. It produces more of what you need to avoid. It doesn't lead to effective action long term, but and all of that would be evident. All of that we'd learn, except for the fact that the immediate effect, the immediate pop is positive, quote unquote. So we take smaller sooner over larger later, which is an evolutionary reality that all living creatures respond to. I mean, the immediate reinforcers in the behavioral way, the behaviorists talk, dominate over these probabilistic and long-term ones. So what you're noticing in your own life is long-term, this doesn't work. You actually have more pain. Plus you have a different kind of pain. Instead of just the pain of presence of like a difficult emotion, you have the pain of absence, of not being able to create the kind of life you want and be able to have the kind of emotions that come with that. So for example, intimate, committed, loyal relationships that have plenty of problems, but you work through them, that has an emotional feel to it that is really, kind of cool. You won't get that if you're avoiding the pain of relationships in a way that you're constantly short-circuiting the process, picking people who are not safe, picking people who are superficial. I mean, like the person who wants an intimate, committed relationship and picks married people to date. What are you doing, dude? What are you doing? A, even if they'll do it, you think they're not going to do it to you later? Be a little careful about that. B, sometimes people are attracted to folks that you cannot build committed relationships around. And if you do that a couple times, you start going, what's going on? What am I doing here? Well, you're detuning to be safe. But detuning to be safe means detuning to be empty, detuning to not be the whole of who you want to be. And I'm not judging that. I mean, date the married guy or whatever, but watch the patterns. And it's cool that you've caught that. The long-term pain is greater, but plus it adds the pain of absence, not just the pain of presence. We're kind of evolutionarily wired to the pain of presence as being, what I mean by that, things that are present and painful as being more centrally important. The things that are missing, you don't notice, called the feature negative effect. We even name it in psychology. Sometimes it's invisible. We don't even notice what's not there that we're yearning for. So both forms are fed by this use of external strategies only in an unwise way. We got new stuff to learn. You won't begin to learn until you rein in the mind enough that you can even notice the patterns consciously.
Yeah, so I mean that's a great case for keeping an eye on emotional and just internal avoidance, I guess. And I'm hearing that avoidance is at the cost of approaching what is valuable. It sounds like a zero-sum game at times. And
Absolutely.
so,
In order to be able to approach, you're going to have to bring with you some of the history. So you need to go from erasing and eliminating it before I can progress to no, I progress and I learn how to carry it with me in a way that doesn't interfere, might even help. And yeah, so you have that approach and avoidance thing. Then you got that sort of inside outside thing, where you've got all this stuff going on, but there's also what are you doing with your feet and your hands? And so if you can just do that, there's a tool in ACT called the matrix where we do it just this way. Imagine that you're looking at a two-dimensional screen, person walking this way or person walking that way. Let's say they're walking that way. They're walking towards what they want. They're walking that way. They're walking away from what they deeply want. And then imagine their head and their heart, their emotions and their thoughts are the top part. But then the bottom part is their hands and their feet, what you actually see from the outside. What if you kind of just think that way and you start to say, okay, what do your head and heart yearn for? What are your values? That's where I sort of started with. But then now, what are the things that happen in your head and heart that take you in the other direction? That's those historical barriers. That's your emotions, your thoughts, your doubts, your self-criticism, your shame, etc. How does that express itself when you're moving away in hands and feet? What do you actually do that feeds that? You avoid. You do all kinds of things. I mean, you may make jokes and pretend it's funny in order to avoid really seeing it. I mean, you look at your own behavior and you'll see you do all kinds of things that foster away moves. They become physical away moves. You drink too much. You drink, drug, you screw anything that moves. I mean, you do stuff, whatever it might be. What does it take for you to have hands and feet headed in a toward direction? If I was following you around, I could see it. It's hands and feet. I can't see your head and heart. I can see your head, but I don't know what's going on inside, right? So that little cycle, if you just sort of think of yourself as kind of the person who's noticing that in the present, and then imagine this 2 by 2, toward and away, inside, outside. What you'll find almost always is that when you're actually moving away, you're being driven by inside aways, things that need to be brought on board in a different way, difficult thoughts, feelings, memories, bodily sensations. And when you do that, channeled into overt behavioral moves, that'll take you towards what you say you really want and what you yearn for, head and heart. That little check. If you had to do one thing, you said ask for something simple. Do that. You can even draw it on a piece of paper. You can fill out the quadrants. What do I yearn for? What goes inside when I go in the other opposite direction? How does that show up actually in my life? The things that I actually do that don't work and that actually, as you've noticed, amplify the negative stuff. And then what would it look like on the outside? And if you can then begin to start deploying behavioral skills on the outside and learning the internal skills to handle those invitations to engage in away moves, that'll do a lot. We've done randomized trials on reading ACT books like Get Out of Your Mind in Your Life, you mentioned, or The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, another one, or A Liberated Mind Over My Shoulder Here, etc. About 2/3 of what you get from a course of ACT therapy, if you actually do it, you can get. So it's not that hard to learn. And if you don't even want to spend the $12 or whatever on a book like Get Out of Your Mind, just go on the internet, search for ACT or psychological flexibility. There's groups out there you can join for free. There's one on the groups.io called ACT for the Public. Been going on for 10 years, a couple thousand people in it. I mean, you can get the supports you need. Don't be using the excuse that it's too expensive or something. Therapy might be and might not be accessible. But doing things that are healthy and helpful for you, that's not a mental illness thing. That's a strength and flexibility thing. And you wouldn't wait to exercise until you get sick. Don't wait to work on your strength and flexibility mentally until you're in a cul-de-sac of panic. That was my avenue in. or depression or drug addiction or whatever.
Thank you so much for filtering that, in terms of the purpose of the podcast, because that's so valuable. I'm sure people listening to this, check out those resources, get the book. I mean, it sounds like there's research that shows that you can actually do that for yourself, which is the question we're exploring here. And I wanna double
If I
down.
could suggest one thing, since
Yeah,
you just said that, look, get out of
sure.
your mind. I've actually done this because we've done randomized trials of it. We know
Mm,
how. Here's my suggestion. If you were to buy that book, skim it in like one day. Don't do any of the exercise, just skim it.
mm,
Like almost flipping pages, but every page.
mm,
Then put it aside for a couple, 3 days. And if it kind of speaks to you that maybe I should, then go back and read it more slowly and do the exercises as you come to it. If you bog down on an exercise, you can skip it, but you might want to, if you bog down, go to one of the Facebook groups, or I mentioned the Act for the Public group, and
mm,
ask questions. What should I do here? And you'll get some guide from people who've already done this.
mm,
Um, if you and if you skip it, go back later and do it. So by the time you've gone through that, that'll be a month later. It'll take you a month to go through the book, where you actually stop, do the exercises, think about it, etc. That's what we've looked at, that approach, and that's what will give you about 2/3 of what a course of therapy will give you. So that's pretty good for a $12 book.
Yeah, that is a bang for your buck, definitely. Yeah, thanks. I'll link the book in the description of the video, and the links to the groups and everything else for anyone who's listening and interested in trying that. That seems like something that's very practical and pretty comprehensive to,
If you want to look at 35,000 feet and give an even bigger view and some self-help book, that's what I do with Liberated Mind. And it tells my personal story and the science story. So it's kind of the kind of book you can give to somebody without kind of feeling as though you're suggesting you need self-help, you need to do something. No, this is just a kind of a useful book that's useful in your life. And in the last part of the book that's over my shoulder, I go through all the areas where we have data, with things like work or prejudice and bias, or sexuality, or all these different areas where these skills have been looked at: diet, exercise, sports, and mental health. And it turns out these same skills, one cool thing about it, learning them, is there is almost nothing you can name that it's not relevant to. I mean, I watch people win a gold medal at the Olympics. I know who their coaches are, and I know what they're doing. There's ACT coaches out there in professional sports, and CEOs of companies, etc. So if you want that kind of orientation, the book over my shoulder will help. But if you really want to get immediately into like doing exercises and things in a detailed way, get out of your mind in your life, or as I mentioned, the happiness trap. Be careful if you go on Amazon, by the way, because we now have counterfeit ACT books because it's so popular. They're skimmed from the internet, and some of them are just wrong. They're not written by real people. They're written by machines that sell counterfeit books.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Isn't that horrible?
Yeah.
Sometimes they have covers with things like "Fight your anxiety with ACT," and I'm going, "Oh no!"
Oh my goodness! How did you find out about this?
Well, I mean, I know that author doesn't exist. Plus, you can see the same author will publish like 4 books in one day, and they all have 5-star reviews. No, that's a shock. Doing this work, and Amazon makes money on it, so they did take down one where they used Stephen C. Haynes instead of and I claimed, and that one they took down. That's the only one we got them to take down. So be careful, but it's not that hard. Just really look for real people who are real universities or real places who write a lot of books, and it's sensible, and they don't have all 5-star reviews, and get the real ones.
Yes. Okay, great. I'll definitely, I was just going to put those links in, but now I'm
Yeah.
going to check each one, make sure I'm putting Hayes and not Haynes. That sounds like the tomato sauce. But
Mhm.
I'll, but I'll, I have one more question for you before we land the plane today. For the people who are watching and thinking, oh man, I'm gonna have to feel this thing that I've been avoiding. I'm going to have to accept or do something with this thing that I've is the very reason I wanted to watch this podcast, was to
Yeah, to get rid of it.
get out of that depression or get out of that anxiety. They might be feeling like, it a bit like they have to resign themselves to this feeling, or they might be
Yeah.
feeling a bit, hopeless. What would you say to those people who, in terms of what they can practically do to be with that feeling? Because it sounds quite abstract. It can sound quite abstract,
Well,
to not avoid it. Yeah.
don't hear what if you're to play back the words you just said,
Mm,
you will find things like have to in the
mm,
sentence said.
mm,
You will find a word like acceptance being linked to a word like resigned.
mm,
Um, and this is what the mind does. This is what the mind does, because if you were to, it would be like uh, putting a banquet on the table and the person's down on the floor, chewing on the table leg and saying, this isn't very tasty. You know, it's not easy to hear what I'm saying because it's filtered through the same normal problem solving filter.
mm,
So, acceptance sounds like resignation and tolerance. No, it came from a Latin word that means to receive, as if to receive a gift. And we still have it in English. We have something really precious, like your grandmother's ring or something, and you really, there's a certain point you say, here, would you accept this? When you give
mm,
the gift, you don't say, would you tolerate this? Would you resign yourself to receive this? That's not what you're saying. You want person to willingly say yes. Well, you mean anxiety is like that? Dude, yes, it is. Look, I'm not going to try to convince you of this, but let me just ask you, take anxiety. What are you anxious about? Well, I'm anxious that I'm not good enough, and people won't want to be around me, or I'll humiliate myself, and I'll get so anxious giving that talk, I'll just drool on myself. Okay, well, wait a minute, slow this down. In other words, you're feeling this emotion that happens when something's threatened. And what's being threatened are things like belonging, love, connection, etc. So are you saying that, like the warning signal that shows up on your car that says, be careful, the temperature is going up, or I drive a Tesla. I'm lucky enough to finally be able to afford one. If you wander a little bit, it goes beep, beep, because warning, you're about to leave your lane.
mm,
Emotions are there for a reason. You say you don't want anxiety, but you ride roller coasters.
mm.
You enjoy fear. You actually have to pay for it. So are you saying you don't want to have any feelers? That you want to be like, what happens to people who have no feelings in their fingers? They lose their fingers. That's what happens with lepers. It isn't just the necrotic tissue eating the fingers. You leave your fingers in a fire. So be careful what you wish for. If you want to get rid of all anxiety, get rid of all sadness, you're getting rid of your feelers. No, I get that what I'm saying right now will not help you open up, really. Let's start with this. The pain that you're experiencing, at least in part, is produced by the effort to not have the pain that you're experiencing. See if that's not true. Just look. And so you said hopeless in there. I don't want to be hopeless. Well, let's be hopeless about that. It'd be like, going into a doctor and you're banging yourself with a rubber hammer and you say, I've got this terrible headache, doctor. What's the matter? And they say, dude, you're hitting yourself over the head with a rubber hammer.
Mm, mm,
What? Yeah, that one that's behind that one. So don't turn it into a have to. That's the same energy that, no, something, if you want a word for acceptance that's closer, it'd be something more like self-kindness. Is it okay for you to hold your own painful emotions the way you'd hold the painful emotions of a crying child? You're probably not going to slap them and say, stop crying. But you'll do that to the person in the mirror. Man, you'll do worse than that. You'll beat yourself about the head and ears for having emotions that you came by honestly. That anxiety is about something. Some of it is about what you yearn for. That's not your enemy. I've never, okay, so you're looking at a person with panic disorder. You're looking at a person who, if you want to see that, go to search TEDx talks and look at my 2 TEDx talks where I walk through this and my own history and how that came. I wrote about it and I liberated mine. And I came by those anxious feelings honestly, and watching domestic violence in my house, and my dad was an alcoholic, my mother was OCD and depressed, etc. So all fine. But what that anxiety really was a signal for was yearning for belonging and relationships that weren't destructive and harmful and dangerous. Yeah. So the takeaway message, I think, would be not something like, oh God, I'm going to have to accept it. It's something more like, you can get what you really want, but you're going to have to learn how to manage your own internal world in a way that's fundamentally different than what you've been doing that haven't been giving you what you want. What your mind says is that you want to get rid of anxiety. But that would, if you get rid of all of your negative emotions, your mind will turn you into the movie The Matrix. I mean, it'll give a world in which you can't even be aware, because you need negative emotions sometimes. My mother died 7 years ago. 2 or 3 days ago would have been her 100th birthday. And when I got the call that she was in day 2 of pneumonia and that it was going in a bad direction, she was in a care facility. I ran to the airport and I got there and I sat by her bedside and I watched over a period of hours as her feet turned black and her breaths spaced out, and she took her last breath. That was sad. Your mind will tell you that sad is bad. Was it bad to be sad when I watched my mother die? Of course not. But that's how stupid the organ between your ears is. It will actually tell you that you can't be sad, that you can't be afraid, that you can't remember past wounds and abuse and react to it emotionally. What? Really? How are you going to be a human being and do that? Answer is you can't. You can't. So let's slow this thing down. I'm not saying you'd have to jump in the deep end of the pool tomorrow. I'm not saying you should wallow in your pain. I'm not saying you have to feel anything, but I'm just saying, could we create a space to be in which you get to be whole and free? And part of that will include difficult emotions, difficult thoughts, difficult memories. Why? Because you've had those things. And those memories are not going to change. If you were raped, you have been raped for the rest of your life. What are you going to do about that? Suppress it? Run from it? Deny it? Avoid any contact with intimate relationships so you don't have to remember it? Good luck with that. You're putting yourself on a life journey. But I'm just saying there's another door here. It's like you're living in a cage and you think it's made of iron, but it's made of rice paper. There's a way forward. There's a way out, not to get rid of, but to open up. And trust your body. If you actually did this, you showed it. You know, almost none of you at your best was not that. So when you're saying, oh, I have to, in other words, it means if I open up and open my eyes, I'll see stuff. Yes, you will. You will. And some of the stuff you see might be your painful history, but there's no have to in there. It's learning to be you and write a story here of what your life is about. That is the hero's journey. Heroes always have challenges. They always stumble and fall. They always think they're not good enough and inadequate. Who, me? I mean, whether it's Frodo or, in Star Wars, who, me? I'm just driving around. I'm just out here on a farm. And when you connect with your friends and you focus on your values and you find a way, to mobilize your resources and to face your past. I'm not afraid, Yoda says, you will be. Because these hero journey stories, there's ones that we read and go, wow, it's because that's the journey we're on. That's why we like those stories. So no have to, but an invitation to be your own hero, to walk that hero's journey, not in a diluted way, but in a one step at a time way. And let's see what life has ahead for you. My guess is something way more human, way more real, way more rich, way more emotional even than the get rid of it, subtract it, ignore it journey that our minds will put us on, where it's as if I could just get small enough, I could have permission to be, like when I'm dead, I won't hurt. Yeah, that's what suicide notes say. 65% of them say, when I'm dead, I won't hurt. That's true. But has a small side effect. How about another alternative? How about learning to live? Let's see if we can do that. And behavioral science can help. But it's not a snap your fingers thing. It's a one step at a time thing.
There's, I viscerally feel the empowerment in that perspective shift. So, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll, for those listening, I'll put in the links of the book, get the book if you want to go into the specifics of how to actualize, these big ideas that we've discussed here. Definitely get into that. Steve, before I let you go, is there any place that people can learn more about you or your work, or where would you, this is your chance to be all about you.
If you want to follow me, just go to my website. It's Stevens with a V, middle initial C, Charlie, my dad's name, Hayes, Hayes, all one word, no periods, StephenCHayes.com. And I will send you a newsletter about every 6 weeks. I don't spam people. And if you ever don't like it, just someone click opt out. And, and if you are interested in exploring it more, I've given you some links just in this talk, but it isn't about, one of the things I've spent a lot of time doing over my 40 years on this is creating a community, and it's worldwide. If you go to contextualscience.org, you can find ACT therapists. About 6,000 of them are listed there. There's about 50,000 ACT therapists that have already been trained and members of that core society. There's another couple 100,000. So we're talking quite a number, and there's 6-7 million books in print on ACT. So it's a worldwide phenomenon, and the core group, the Associated Contextual Behavioral Science, has 9,000 members in 28 different chapters. No matter where you are around the world, there are ACT people now, and you can find them if you need a therapist. And if you're listening to this podcast because you want to try it the other way, you can find those resources there. And So that's how to follow me, but it's not just about me. Focus on what it is that life is asking us to learn. And I think it's asking us to learn to be more psychologically flexible. And in this year of COVID and all the rest, boy, have we not learned that it's all of us 24/7. It's not 1 out of 5. Not you're the broken one, 1 out of 5. It's 5 out of 5, 24/7. And let's put that into our hearts and our heads and our hands and our culture and our families and our communities and our clinics and our workplaces, and create a softer, kinder, more values-based world.
Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast, sharing so much valuable insight. I hope the listeners got a lot of value from that. I gave you a minute to just speak about yourself, and you went right back to giving more value to everyone else. But yeah, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.